Hi everyone, I'm Laia, and today I'm going to defend the topic that GDP is a good measure of well-being. But first I'm going to define what's GDP, what it includes or excludes, its formula, and some information to be in the real context. GDP is a measure of the income and the expenditures of an economy. Gross domestic product is known by GDP. What I was explaining is that it's the final market value of the goods and services produced within a country in a given period of time. GDP includes all products that are produced in an economy or are sold legally in a market, but it excludes most products that are consumed or produced at home and that never enter to the marketplace. It also excludes products that are illegal, such as drugs. If we want to measure GDP, it's just a sum of the four components of expenditures. We have to sum the investment, the government purchase, the net export, and finally the consumption. Now that we know more or less some information about GDP, let's focus on the real topic of the debate. Is GDP a real and a good measure of well-being? New Zealand has become the first officially nation to incorporate measures of well-being on the government ledge, including health indicators, environmental and educational ones. The traditional indicator of wealth, GDP, has not been tossed out. It remains the predominant indicator of wealth in the nation. We know that it's not a perfect measure because it doesn't take into account, for example, leisure time or clean environment. But it's a good measure because we know that people prefer higher than lower incomes. Because most people prefer to receive higher incomes and enjoy higher expenditures, GDP seems to be a natural measure of well-being and a measure of the economic well-being of the average individual. Now I'm going to read something that Robert Kennedy once said, and I totally agree with him, and I support his idea about that GDP is a good measure of well-being in a large period of time. Okay, so he said, GDP does in fact help us to lead good lives. GDP does not measure the health of our children, but nations with larger GDP can afford better healthcare for their children. GDP does not measure the quality of their education, but nations with larger GDP can afford better educational systems. GDP does not measure the beauty of our poetry, but nations with larger GDP can afford to teach more of their citizens to read and enjoy poetry. GDP does not take account of our intelligence, integrity, courage, wisdom, or devotion to country, but all of these laudable attributes are easier to foster when people are less concerned about being able to afford the material necessities of life. In short, GDP does not directly measure those things that make life worthwhile, but it does measure our ability to obtain many of the inputs into a worthwhile life. So I agree that maybe in a short period of time, it's not as good as in a large time. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye!